Over there.
Good afternoon. My name is Eric Olson, and I'm the Senior Advisor for the Security Initiative here at the Mexico Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center. Thank you for your patience. We were just wrapping up a meeting with the Council of Western Attorneys General and the Council of State Governments with a couple of federal authorities, and ran a little bit late. And now one of our speakers, who will join us shortly, is signing a memorandum of understanding, Attorney General Moreno from Baja, California. But in the interest of moving things along and not making you wait any longer, I think we'll get the ball rolling, and he'll join us in just a few minutes, a part of this panel. We are thrilled to have this opportunity to hear from a number of states and attorneys general, who have a long history of working together with their counterparts in Mexico, training in areas of rule of law and justice reform and strengthening. I am going to introduce our moderator for the day, Larry Harrington. Larry Harrington has a long and distinguished public service career, having worked in the U.S. Congress, having worked in the Treasury Department, having been the representative of the Inter-American Development Bank for several years in Mexico. He also happens to be a member of the Mexico Institute's advisory board and the chief deputy to the Attorney General of the state of Tennessee. So he fits the bill perfectly today, having great Mexico experience and also working for an Attorney General here in the United States. So I want to welcome Larry and invite him to be the moderator of our session today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Eric. I want to take this opportunity. I'll introduce the panel members in a second, but I want to take a second just to mention the attorneys general who are here today. In addition to those that are on the panel, we have members of the National Association of Attorneys General in town participating in spring meetings with that association, and the Western State Attorneys General, some not Western States Attorneys General. But I'd like to ask, just read off their names and ask them to stand up. We're certainly pleased to have their participation, and we've got enough time on this panel that after we have an interchange among the panel, hopefully we'll have some comments and questions from the Attorneys General that are here. But just to run through the list of those that are here or about to come in, we have Alicia Limtiaco from Guam. We have Mark Bennett from Hawaii, Lawrence Wasden from Idaho, Steve Bullock from Montana, Gary's here, Mark Shurtleff from Utah, Rob McKenna from Washington, Greg Zoller from Indiana, and Daniel Sullivan from Alaska. So if those attorneys general would stand, I'd appreciate it, just to be recognized. Oh, one more. I knew I'd miss one. I knew it. It was
Northern Mariana Islands.
Northern Mariana Islands. Mr. Buckingham, Northern Mariana Islands. Sorry to do that. If y'all would just stand briefly, just so everybody can see who you are, they might want to. And I'm going to do a very brief introduction, very brief, of the panel members, and then we'll open it for comments and discussion. First of all, I want to introduce Attorney General John Suthers from the state of Colorado. He holds a BA from the University of Notre Dame and a Juris Doctor from the University of Colorado. He's been Executive Director of the Colorado Department of Corrections. He has also served as U.S. Attorney for Colorado and was confirmed to that position. He was appointed Attorney General of Colorado and was elected later in 2006. I also want to introduce Gary King. He's the Attorney General of New Mexico. He holds a BA in Chemistry from New Mexico State University and obtained a PhD in Organic Chemistry from Colorado University, and then he attended law school at the University of New Mexico, where he received his JD. He's served in the state legislature there in New Mexico for 12 years, served as chairman of the Consumer and Public Affairs Committee. He was a policy advisor subsequent to that to the Assistant Secretary for Environmental Management at the Department of Energy, and he was elected to this position in New Mexico in 2006. And then finally, I want to introduce Rommel Moreno. He holds a master's in international law from the National Autonomous University of Mexico in Mexico City, and he's currently a PhD candidate at UNAM. From 1986 to 1988, he served as an advisor to Mexico's Assistant Secretary of the Interior. Subsequent to that, he served as counsel to Hacienda, or the Ministry of Finance and Public Credit, and he currently serves as Attorney General of northern Baja, California. I'm going to ask General Suthers to kick this off because he has a distinguished career in terms of law enforcement, but also has been very involved in these programs that CWAG, as we call it, the Western States Attorneys General Association, has been involved in with their counterparts in Mexico. So, General Suthers, if you could kick this off for us, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Woodrow Wilson Center, especially Andrew Seeley and Robert Donnelly, for organizing what we think is a great opportunity to discuss the shared issues that states on both sides of the borders are facing. And on behalf of my colleagues from the Conference of Western Attorney Generals, I can tell you that, in our individual offices, day in and day out, we're confronted by all kinds of legal questions that keep us really busy. But we are so committed to this alliance that I'm about to tell you about because we realize that what's going on the Mexican-American border and what the eventual outcome is of our efforts and our efforts towards judicial reform in Mexico are going to impact generations of Mexicans and Americans alike. So we feel this is among the most important things that we're involved in. The United States-Mexico State Alliance Partnership is a collaborative alliance consisting of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, the Council of State Governments, its Western and Southern regional offices, the Conference of Western Attorney Generals, which is 15 Western states and the Pacific Territories, and the National Association of State Treasurers, the National Lieutenant Governors Association, and other agencies. Its goal is to strengthen cooperation among state officials and institutions in the United States and Mexico. The Alliance Partnership promotes and convenes binational exchanges and workshops among border legislators, attorneys general, and treasurers that enhance the role of state officials in addressing shared public policy concerns. The partnership promotes the integration of activities and outreach with other binational organizations so that concrete policy objectives and reforms can be achieved through a strategic, multi-branch, and multi-jurisdictional approach. The Alliance partners, their respective members, networks, and linkages comprise a broad and influential coalition that we believe can affect change. The Alliance Partnership is an innovative mechanism of cooperation that enables dynamic synergies and cross-jurisdictional collaboration. Financial support for the Alliance Partnership is provided by a grant from USAID, along with significant in-kind and direct support by participating partners and the respective member states, as well as financial contributions by private sector stakeholders. The partnership is administered by the Council of State Governments. Now, the specific goals of the Attorney General component of the Alliance Partnership is to strengthen and expand binational collaborative relationships among state attorneys general of Mexico and the United States, particularly through binational policy exchanges and training seminars. Binational exchanges bring together attorneys general from U.S. and Mexican states took place in 2008 and 2009, and annual exchanges are planned for the future. These interactions have resulted in policymakers and law enforcement authorities in both countries passing legislation addressing issues of trafficking in arms, drugs, and human beings, increasing penalties for violations, and developing legal mechanisms and cooperative efforts to disrupt the business of the Mexican cartels. A primary legal objective of the partnership has been to address rampant money laundering by cartels in the United States. The Conference of Western Attorney Generals members through the Alliance Partnership, at the request of Mexico's Federal Attorney General's Office, are sharing investigative and tracking techniques which will significantly impact the cash revenue flowing to the cartels. In 2009, New Mexico, Texas, and Arizona legislatures all passed initiatives in one or all of their legislative bodies addressing money laundering and trafficking issues. Through its capacity-building seminars, CWAG has conducted 10 training programs for prosecutors and investigators from Mexican state and federal attorneys general offices, training over 350 people to date. With 11 more trainings scheduled through the end of this year, over 600 more prosecutors and investigators will be participating in upcoming seminars. By partnering with state attorneys general's offices and such institutions as the Northwestern School of Law, we're able to offer trial advocacy courses with experienced and committed trial attorneys who are enthusiastic about the opportunity to make a difference in the delivery of justice in Mexico. Our forensic training and technical assistance program has kicked off the year hosting forensics laboratory directors and staff from 26 jurisdictions in Mexico. Over 100 forensic scientists from Mexican states will participate in upcoming trainings, including 2 intensive DNA Train the Trainer workshops at California State University, Los Angeles this summer. In addition, prosecutors, investigators, and lab technicians throughout Mexico and the United States will soon have access to online DNA courses in English and Spanish through the CWAG website with ballistics courses in development. The CWAG website's forensics section will be online within the next week and will be the premier internet location for current, accurate, and comprehensive forensic science information in Spanish. A judicial training component is in development, which will add key support for Mexico's adoption of an oral advocacy system by offering courtroom management skills to judicial officers at all levels of Mexico's court system. Over 100 judicial officers will be invited to take advantage of our programs this year alone. In summary, more than 1,000 Mexican legal professionals will receive training in more than a dozen capacity-building courses throughout this year. Under the constitutional reforms passed in 2008 and being implemented on a state-by-state basis in Mexico, adversary trials will become the norm in Mexican courtrooms. The judges, prosecutors, investigators, and forensic scientists who will participate in CWAG's trainings will be the founding fathers and the mothers of oral advocacy in Mexico. A transparent and accountable legal system will allow for the growth of trust in the justice system among the citizens of Mexico, as well as promote social and economic stability throughout American society. These social advances will provide immediate and tangible benefits to citizens north of the border as crime decreases and prosperity increases. As the chair of the Conference of Western Attorney Generals, it's been my pleasure to preside over the expansion of Alliance Partnership training programs in support of the efforts of the Mexican people to implement their criminal justice reforms.
Great. Thank you very much. I think what we'll do is let each panelist make their comments, and then we'll have a round of questions. Licenciado Moreno, por favor.
Muy buenos días a todos los presentes.
There is simultaneous translation, and so if you haven't gotten already, you're...
Yeah, we'll take a second. They're getting the PowerPoint set up anyway, so we'll take a second to let you get your... Should have mentioned that earlier, sorry.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's easier.
That's really...
Gary, you were sharp enough to grab one on your way in.
I did.
Could we get...
For the interruption.
We get one for
I try to do my best. It's incredible because
Miguel.
I was a little bit nervous, but I rather prefer speak in Spanish because I would like to talk with passion. It's different. So I want to ask for help in English. Thank you for your patience, please.
John, use this one. If they bring another one, then I'll...
They're bringing one. They're bringing another one.
Yeah.
I'll force myself to...
I get about 80%, but...
Okay.
Okay, I think we could go ahead.
Bien. Vamos a iniciar. Represento la generación de la esperanza. Represento a una visión de mexicanos que hoy estamos viviendo una guerra, y es una guerra real. En este momento hay 30 personas que están cuidando mi vida. Y si ustedes investigan un poco, lo mismo sucede a la procuradora de Chihuahua o a los procuradores de nuestros estados. Y la primera pregunta es, ¿cómo es que hoy México ha pasado a esta experiencia dramática en los últimos años? Simple y sencillamente es que esta es una guerra comercial. Es un tema que tiene que ver con las drogas, tiene que ver con la ley de la oferta y la demanda, y tiene que ver que la ruta del tránsito de la droga cambió desde Sudamérica, Colombia, hacia Miami por el Caribe, y fueron tan hábiles los norteamericanos en términos de que ahora entonces tuvimos que encontrar otro camino, otra dinámica, y justo es el paso de mi país por donde la droga está pasando. Y sucede que bajo esta visión lo que hoy estamos experimentando es que cuáles son los mitos. Antes yo no podría hablar hoy de la implementación de un nuevo sistema, de los cambios dramáticos que se están haciendo en la justicia, si no enfrento realmente la guerra contra los cárteles mexicanos que han potencializado su fuerza, porque hoy están en 254 ciudades de los Estados Unidos de Norteamérica y prácticamente han trabajado fuertemente en los países del este, de Europa y África del Norte. Por lo tanto, es un tema en el cual vengo con todo el entusiasmo y la humildad a advertirles a muchos de ustedes lo que puede suceder en poco tiempo. Porque no es un tema de México, es un tema de los Estados Unidos, es un tema de Canadá, es un tema de las gangas, de las pandillas, del narcomenudeo, de las drogas que se venden en las calles. Y lo primero que quiero plantear aquí es lo siguiente, que se ha hablado mucho que México está, esta expresión, colombianizado, o es un peligro de ser un estado fallido. Y lo que quiero decir que en Colombia, los niveles de penetración que tuvo el narcotráfico en la política, en el ejército, en los negocios y en la sociedad han sido mayores que en nuestra sociedad. Y en Colombia, candidatos a la presidencia, el mismo presidente Uribe ha sufrido atentados y han sido secuestrados muchísimas gentes relevantes de este país. Déjenme comentarles que además de ello, hoy hemos hecho un régimen de excepción. Este régimen de excepción tiene que ver con los militares, la presencia de los militares en las calles de nuestra ciudad. No estamos acostumbrados, pero la gente no tiene confianza en su policía. En una manera de broma, los universitarios siempre planteábamos en la universidad, sabíamos este libro de Jeffrey Davidow que habla sobre la relación México-Estados Unidos, el oso y el cuerpoespín. Significa el oso es Estados Unidos, el fuerte, y México el cuerpoespín, es una especie de pequeño puerquito que es muy sensible a la política. Todo lo que dice Estados Unidos es como, no me gusta esto lo que estás diciendo. ¿Cómo trabajar en esta relación bilateral? Y significa entonces que llegamos al último de los puntos, porque la sociedad en México no tiene confianza en su policía. En la generación nuestra, hoy la policía quedó en el último lugar. Los niños ya no quieren ser policías. Nosotros en mi generación queríamos ser bomberos y policías. Hoy la gente tiene un divorcio hacia las autoridades judiciales, hacia las autoridades policíacas. Por lo tanto, no hay este encuentro. Significa que tenemos que reconstruirnos y rehacernos. Por eso es que llegó el ejército. La gente confía en el ejército. Pero el ejército no sabe cómo investigar un secuestro o un homicidio, no tiene las técnicas de investigación y no sabe qué significa las evidencias o la custodia de las evidencias en la escena del crimen. Simple y sencillamente tiene la confianza del pueblo. Por eso nos tuvimos primero que poner de acuerdo nosotros. Hoy ustedes oyen por las noticias lo que pasa en Juárez, lo que ha pasado en Tijuana y lo que ha pasado en muchas ciudades de mi país. Y la gente tiene miedo y está confundida. Por eso, antes que nada, lo primero que tenemos que hacer es enfrentar a los carteles, porque la corrupción permeó básicamente en la policía. Y aquí la impresión es que hay un intenso debate hoy en México si la inseguridad es una señal de agravamiento, pero estamos en una guerra, y en la guerra hay muertos, y es preferible esta dinámica porque de otra forma durante 20 años estuvimos callados. Y nadie quería hablar del tema y el narcotráfico empezó a penetrar en las escuelas, en las discotecas, en la venta de droga, en toda la organización social. Por eso hoy estamos frente a esta realidad y hemos decidido poner un alto de alguna manera. Y ahora es que hemos tenido que confiar primero el ejército en nosotros, nosotros en el ejército. Y lo que está sucediendo entonces es que estamos generando una nueva perspectiva en la guerra. Estamos finalmente en esa dinámica. Es preferible hablar de este tema porque en las democracias emergentes, cuando se habla de estos temas es como de debilidad. Cuando se habla de temas polémicos en las democracias establecidas como la de ustedes, es un tema de estabilidad. En la de nosotros es, si hablamos de esto es porque estamos débiles, pero es preferible abrir el debate, que en una democracia se diga lo que se tenga que decir, que la prensa haga lo que tenga que hacer. Pero también me parece que tenemos que romper con todas estas series de mitos de que al final no hay una esperanza. Y creo que yo lo que hoy pudiera plantear básicamente en esta rápida presentación es que sí hay una esperanza. Y hablo que evidentemente los muertos y la violencia, se dice que pareciera que se está perdiendo la guerra, pero el narcotráfico es un enemigo muy bien armado, muy violento y sin barreras y con gran poder. A este enemigo solo es posible someterlo con la fuerza del Estado y es lo que estamos haciendo ahora nosotros. Yo vengo a hablar desde una experiencia propia, justamente al lado de Juárez, donde hemos estado viviendo todo esto que está sucediendo. Lo que estamos tratando de hacer es dar confianza. El presidente Calderón está hablando de que de alguna manera la guerra la estamos librando y en Tijuana estamos haciendo lo imposible. Simple y sencillamente nos unimos y aquí tuvo que ver mucho Estados Unidos. Porque antes hay una barrera del gobierno federal, y aunque somos fronterizos, y aunque tenemos una relación constante con San Diego, con Los Ángeles, con Yuma, con Arizona, había una barrera institucional, teníamos todo que depender del gobierno federal, pero ahora la relación es tan dinámica y tan activa que tenemos contacto directo con la DEA, con el FBI, con las estructuras de justicia, porque déjenme decirles a ustedes que en el sur de California hoy están pasando ya secuestros, 32 eventos que se están dando y cómo resolverlos, porque en los Estados Unidos tienen otra dinámica en términos de los tipos legales. Por eso por primera vez estamos ayudándonos unos a otros en California, pero lo que me parece más relevante es el agradecimiento eterno a los procuradores norteamericanos y a mis amigos, al procurador de Idaho, a Gary, o al propio procurador de Utah, o al procurador ahora de Colorado, que son nuestra inspiración. Porque para llegar al sistema y para pasar a esta segunda fase, tenemos que vivir hoy lo que estamos experimentando. Por eso aquí quiero rápidamente, en unos segundos, hablarles de los avances que ha habido, que ha sido a la colaboración de inteligencia de las autoridades federales norteamericanas, básicamente a la información. La inteligencia se ganó con la confianza, con el decir, aquí estamos delante de ustedes, véanos, vean ustedes qué antecedentes tenemos. Simple y sencillamente lo único que tenemos que hacer es que esto que pasa hoy en Baja no pase en California o en Arizona o en otros estados. Inclusive hemos ido hasta Seattle y hemos trabajado con los canadienses para advertir que esta droga también se está vendiendo en Vancouver y en otras partes de los Estados Unidos. Aquí ustedes se dan cuenta, hemos fortalecido una estructura de antisecuestros. Este fue un tema quizás el más importante en mi país el año pasado, que generó toda una polémica del fracaso aparente que estaba viviendo en nuestro país en este tema. Era como el tema de moda, el secuestro, y tuvimos entonces que hacer unidades modelo y empezar a trabajar de alguna manera muy dinámica con otros países. Empezamos a depurar, empezamos a trabajar rápidamente, a dar confianza. La policía en México no tiene autoestima, no cree en ella misma, como en una guerra luchar contra soldados que no tienen alma ni tienen visión, porque todo lo que tiene que ver con justicia y seguridad en la agenda hasta ahora salió y vino como una cascada y todo el mundo era el resultado emotivo, el resultado rápido, pero esto es un tema generacional. Hemos aprendido de los chilenos y de los colombianos. Ustedes han ayudado a los colombianos, han ayudado a los chilenos. Y a ellos les tocó 20 años. Hoy la policía más importante en América Latina es la policía chilena, la policía colombiana. A nosotros nos va a tocar 20 años quizás, pero nosotros estamos del lado de ustedes, somos sus vecinos. Y cuando estamos como vecinos tenemos que entender esta relación bilateral, porque tiene que ver con este proceso de ayuda automática que se está dando ya en los estados. No esperar tanto el esfuerzo federal, que sí viene, pero tarda mucho. Mientras llega la guerra y llega la batalla, nosotros estamos librando todos los días estos temas. Pero tenemos que hacerlo con entusiasmo y tenemos que darle a la gente confianza, porque la gente no tiene una idea de lo que está sucediendo. Ellos dicen, hay un homicidio, y entonces la federación dice, el homicidio debe de resolverse por las fuerzas estatales. Pero los estatales decimos, si es un comando, si viene un tanque, si viene un encapuchado, si viene un grupo de gente, es federal. Y hay una parálisis de la justicia en México. Por eso es que hemos tenido que revisar nuestra visión. Y tiene que ver con la confrontación, que más allá del aspecto legal, más allá de todo esto, tenemos que saltar con todos estos protocolos, porque los muertos se están acumulando. Y muchos de estos muertos son jóvenes que fueron atrapados por el narco. Jóvenes sin expectativas que llegaron, que no tenían qué hacer. Se han hecho investigaciones muy importantes por los académicos. Y los jóvenes, muchos de ellos, no tienen empleo, no tienen expectativas de vida y no tienen futuro. Y la gente, por $100, simple y sencillamente lo que hace es matar gente. Y en eso estamos convirtiendo a nuestro país. Solamente en el tema de homicidios, déjenme decirles, en mi ciudad, el año pasado, si yo hago cálculos, murieron 1,000 personas. Pero en Río de Janeiro mueren también cuántas personas, en Venezuela. Si hablamos del número de habitantes o del número de muertos, calculando, lo mismo pasa en Oakland y pasa en Luisiana y pasa en Phoenix. Hablamos entonces, si bien es cierto, de una guerra, pero tendríamos que revisar también todo lo que está viendo mediáticamente. Nuestra función hoy es la autocrítica, el definir que sí, en efecto, la corrupción ha sido galopante, pero estamos en este proceso. Por eso aquí los avances que estamos planteando es fortalecer la investigación. Déjenme decirles de verdad que hoy ministerios públicos por primera vez y policías están llegando a ciudades, como lo decía hace un momento, a Seattle, a Boise, a Denver, y vienen con una expectativa de vida, porque cambió su forma de ver las cosas. Muchos de ellos, un día me dijo el comandante de la policía, señor procurador, lo más importante que yo viví en esta experiencia no fue el viaje ni el entrenamiento, sino que el procurador de Idaho me trató como un ser humano. Cuando volteamos a ver a las personas, no importa cuántos tanques o cuánta tecnología, o que el Plan Mérida haga milagros con el esfuerzo. Lo que importa es el hecho de tener una identidad y de verdad luchar por lo que uno busca. Ser procurador hoy en mi país no es nada rentable. Yo gano 100,000 pesos al mes, pero estoy amenazado de muerte. Y yo sé que hay muchísimas gentes igual que yo que tienen una visión y una generación nueva que está dispuesta a pagar el precio. Y el precio tiene que ver con ustedes en un futuro. Cuando se hablaba del comunismo en los 50, nadie entendía todavía hasta que pasó todo un proceso. Y las guerras y toda esta experiencia que ustedes vivieron y nosotros también han sido como una cascada que llega de repente y no vemos cuándo llega un virus o cuándo llega una amenaza potencial. Hoy estamos asustados con los terremotos y el tsunami y todas estas historias, pero detrás está una guerra galopante que es el narcotráfico, que llega por los niños, que llega por las generaciones jóvenes. Aquí solamente quiero yo rápidamente hablar. Hoy estamos hablando por primera vez de la alerta Amber. Esta fue una experiencia que llegaron del Departamento de Estado y nos dijeron, ¿cómo están ustedes evolucionando en el tema de lo que tiene que ver con los reportes de los niños perdidos? Y bueno, tuvimos que revisar un poco nuestras leyes. Nosotros en México para este tema teníamos que esperar 72 horas. Pero ahora con este programa y todo lo que escuchamos y todo lo que creemos que es conveniente y vale la pena, lo adoptamos para nosotros. Por lo tanto, hoy en nuestro estado, en Baja California, es el primer estado del país que inició con la alerta Amber, que ustedes ya tienen mucha experiencia en todos estos temas. Lo que estamos haciendo es tratar de imitar las buenas formas, los mecanismos que puedan avanzar. Y estamos entonces trabajando rápidamente en todos estos programas que nos ayudan a incentivar una nueva visión. Estos son los convenios internacionales que hemos hecho en los 2 últimos años, porque hemos tenido que correr muy rápido. Y vean ustedes, todo es como nuestra fortaleza. Cuando yo muestro este mapa, es mi esperanza. Porque ustedes dicen, ¿y qué tiene que hacer alguien de Baja California con Utah? Pues déjenme decirles que en Salt Lake City hay mexicanos que también están traficando con las drogas. Y esto ha sido todo como una mancha, y estamos muy entusiasmados porque no es el hecho de hacer el convenio por el convenio, son 50 estados y tenemos que hacer simple y sencillamente lo mejor que nos corresponde, que es trabajar en esta hermandad y en esta capacitación, de lo que tenemos que agradecer eternamente a la Conferencia de Procuradores Norteamericanos. Es aquí donde estamos viendo cómo los policías nuestros estuvieron en Seattle y estamos hablando de Oregon en octubre de 2009, estamos hablando de Idaho con nuestro hermano, es nuestra inspiración en Baja California, Lawrence, y todo este grupo de gentes que está yendo y llega con la alegría de decir, algo está pasando en nuestras vidas profesionales y tenemos esperanza. Y aquí está todo este tema que hemos venido haciendo rápido para poder llegar a los objetivos que queremos. Lo que queremos plantear es que en 3 años del presidente Calderón, al final creo que podemos tener una esperanza. Y si ustedes observan, hemos ido también con los colombianos. Hoy por hoy, el tema del secuestro, que es un tema que no es muy conocido, déjenme decirles que propiamente el FBI entrenó a los colombianos y ahora los colombianos nos han estado entrenando a nosotros. En la época del presidente Uribe, más de 3,000 secuestros. Y si ahora nosotros lo traducimos, es como empezamos a llevar a nuestra gente a Colombia, pero al mismo tiempo lo estamos haciendo en Miami con el FBI, estamos teniendo prácticas directas con el FBI en todas estas zonas. Yo quisiera, además de ello, hemos ido hasta Italia. ¿Y por qué a Italia? Bueno, porque en Italia vivieron la experiencia de la mafia y en Colombia vivieron estos procesos y ahora, de alguna manera, estamos como tratando de redefinir las políticas públicas para estos países que vivieron estas experiencias relacionadas con el narcotráfico. Inclusive, fuimos y hemos trabajado al impulso de la Conferencia de Procuradores, donde conocimos al procurador canadiense precisamente en estas reuniones. He aquí rápidamente para concluir el sistema acusatorio. Estamos hoy, pues, como lo decía hace un momento el procurador de Colorado, en este tema de la capacitación, de la reingeniería, de la planeación y de la sensibilización de la ciudadanía. La gente hoy en mi país no conoce el actual sistema y le es muy difícil el nuevo sistema, no entiende esto de la oralidad, no entiende la transparencia, no entiende qué significa la presunción de inocencia, simple y sencillamente quieren que haya justicia. Y para mí es muy importante este tema porque finalmente es a lo que aquí estamos, el tener que forzosamente redimensionar todo lo que es la fortaleza de Seaway AG. Y los retos son al final de la película, todo lo que estamos tratando de hacer, es que los ciudadanos hoy crean en su gente. Yo quiero concluir con esta presentación y decir que más que nunca hoy estamos en una etapa en la que hay una pasión por las cosas. Uno no puede llegar a este foro y no vivir verdaderamente lo que uno está haciendo, porque guerras hay en todas partes, pero esta guerra está al lado de ustedes, está en Arizona, está en California, está en Nuevo México, y por eso creo que hoy mi trabajo y mi función al final es simple y sencillamente decirles que estamos juntos y que tenemos que estar juntos como una generación, porque al final creo que lo más importante de todo es que lo que uno hace lo haga con este entusiasmo. A nombre pues del pueblo de Baja California, yo les agradezco infinitamente esta oportunidad porque me permite al menos decir que tenemos esperanza como la tienen ustedes en todas las guerras que han ganado. Muchísimas gracias.
Very much, licenciado Moreno, impresionante. General King, you're third but not last, and I think in a way in a good position to be sort of a rapporteur. You have two very interesting presentations of what's happening on each side of the border, and so if you could follow up with your comments and then we'll open it up. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. It's sort of hard for me to follow up after a dynamic presentation like that. But I do want to tell you, one of the reasons, hopefully, that I'm here on this panel is because we have a lot of experience in New Mexico in working with our counterparts in Mexico. The first state in Mexico that adopted the judicial changes that we're talking about was the state of Chihuahua, which is our sister state in New Mexico. And so my office, and even starting with my predecessor, has been doing training of personnel from the Attorney General's office in Chihuahua for about 4 years now. And so the progress of the change to the new justice system, I think, is a little further down the road, but maybe not with such enthusiasm as we have in some of the newer states like Baja California. And Attorney General Wasden and I had an opportunity to go to Baja California 2 or 3 weeks ago to try and help in a way there too. And so I want to talk about maybe some of the nuts and bolts things that we've been doing enough to generate your interest, and then I assume we will have an opportunity to answer some specific questions that you might have. But the way that we have carried out these operations between New Mexico and Chihuahua, and then certainly we've expanded that so that we're doing the same kinds of things with all of the western states and all of the states in Mexico that want to work with us. And I think it really is most. We certainly have had joint meetings in Mexico that I think that there were 28 attorneys general from Mexico and about 15 attorneys general from the United States that all met together 2 years ago in Mexico City and in Morelos. But a lot of what's being carried out is not being carried out at the federal level. It's the initial agreements between Chihuahua and New Mexico were just memorandums of understanding between the two attorneys general's offices. And the first agreement had to do with sharing information to fight drug trafficking and also to provide the joint training that we've had. And we brought a lot of personnel who sat side by side with our attorneys in court and with our police investigators as they went out onto crime scenes, and with our crime lab personnel. They sat and worked in the crime labs. And the states in Mexico have spent a significant amount of money in building new courthouses and new crime labs, and so in a lot of ways they have really good equipment in order to carry this out. But of course, it's not the equipment that makes this process work. It's the bravery and the dedication of the people in Mexico, the attorneys and the police authorities and the investigators that really make this work. And I want to say right up front how proud I am of the work that our Mexican counterparts are doing, because it just takes, as you can tell, an extreme amount of commitment to this process for them, and not just commitment like, we're all for our causes here in the United States, but it's very seldom that we have to have armed security guards go all around with us to carry out our commitment. And in this case, our counterparts in Mexico are in a literal war as well as a figurative war. But these memorandums of understanding, I think, have been very successful in helping us to share information, and there's a flow of personnel across the border. We signed a second memorandum of understanding with the Attorney General in Chihuahua to deal with trafficking in arms, which is a huge problem. Guns that are bought in the United States that are being taken into Mexico and being used in crimes in Mexico, and not just handguns, but 50 caliber rifles, 50 caliber machine guns, AK-47s, those kinds of weapons that are being taken there, and they're even now in raids against the cartels are finding grenade launchers and mortars and very significant military equipment that's being utilized in the war there. And so we're sharing information to try and figure out what sorts of sources in the United States might be shipping arms to Mexico. And you might think in New Mexico that, okay, well, a lot of the guns will come from Albuquerque or Las Cruces or El Paso or San Diego or something like that. But guns that are going into Mexico that we have tracked are coming from all over. They're coming from Chicago and Kansas City and New York and Seattle and those places. So that's why I think we all are involved in this process together. It's not just an issue that involves the border states. The third memorandum of understanding that we signed, and that was a real benefit for New Mexico, is the state of Chihuahua had in place 2 years ago already a good statute to fight human trafficking. It was already a crime there, and in most of the states on the American states on the border, human trafficking was also a crime. In New Mexico, when I became the Attorney General, it was not. There was no specific crime of human trafficking. And I thought, well, this will be easy. as a legislator, I'll introduce a bill that, you would think a bill that makes human slavery a crime would be really easy to get through your legislature. That bill did not pass the first year that I introduced it into the legislature, and it had to do more with concerns that some groups had in New Mexico that said, well, it's not enough to just make it a crime. What are you going to do to deal with the victims of the crime? How are you going to help them? How are you going to help them, their families, to not get murdered or have something bad happen to them in the country where they are? Because the traffickers certainly tell their victims, if you go to the police, not only if we can get you, we'll kill you, but we'll certainly kill your family wherever they come from. And so there are a lot of resources that are necessary to help treat and deal with the victims of human trafficking too. But the second year we tried this in the New Mexico legislature, I had Patricia Gonzalez, who is the Attorney General from Chihuahua, come to New Mexico, and we signed an MOU when our legislature started, and then she went and helped me lobby that change through our legislature to create that human trafficking law and the system that we use to share information regarding victims of human trafficking between our two countries. And we think that that's very important. So there are a lot of great things that we've learned in working with law enforcement in Mexico. Just as another nuts and bolts thing, I will tell you that there's a young investigator that works for the crime lab in Chihuahua that developed a technique for rehydrating dehydrated bodies that are found in the desert to the point where they can get fingerprints from the rehydrated body. And that's a technology we hadn't had to develop in the United States yet, but something that was developed there, and they've shared that with us. So we really are in the sharing of information, improving law enforcement on both sides of the border, and I think that's really important. So we, since that point in time, have expanded with many MOUs between various of the western states, and I think that Procurador Moreno has shown you how many states he has joint agreements with. And Attorney General Suthers talked about the alliance that we have now that's working to do this. But the battle that we're fighting is not just a battle in Mexico. We think that, particularly in Arizona, and we don't have the Attorney General from Arizona here today, but they're seeing a lot of the violence spill across the border in kidnappings that are occurring in Arizona. There have been a few kidnappings in New Mexico. There have certainly been drug-related killings and cartel drug-related killings in Arizona and in New Mexico, and in other states further north of the border. So if we don't all work together to deal with this international criminal element now, it certainly will continue to spread. I think that was one of the most important messages that you got from Attorney General Moreno. So we're enthusiastic about what we're doing. We think that there are a lot of problems, but we think that there are a lot of people who are working on solutions. And I think with that, for our moderator, I will maybe make those my opening comments, and then we're happy to answer more specific questions regarding the what truly is I think a monumental program that spans several countries in the Western Hemisphere that is not only difficult but one of the most amazing things that I've been able to be involved in with regard to making this change in the justice system in Mexico, which we think is going to greatly benefit both of our countries.
Thank you very much, General King. I want to open it up to questions. We've got about 30 minutes for questions, and I'm going to kick it off. I didn't see hands jump up, so sometimes do we get one? Do we have a hand? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'll jump in when we have a lag, because I do have one question. But we do have a microphone, so when you ask a question, wait for the microphones so that the simultaneous translation can catch up.
Hi.
Could you please state your name and affiliation too?
My name is Katie Benton Cohen from Georgetown University, and I'm a fellow here at the Woodrow Wilson Center. My question hinges on the last comment about Arizona and the rise in kidnappings. I'm familiar with Attorney General Goddard's comments on that and the rising concerns about that, especially in the Phoenix metropolitan area. But in contrast, El Paso remains relatively safe. And in fact, if you look at the scale of violence on the other side of the border, it's amazing that there isn't more on the northern side of the border related. I wondered if whomever would like to could comment on why there remains actually a relatively stark line in those in the amount of violence on either side of the border pertaining to this issue. Thanks.
Well, we don't have a Texan here, but we'll see if anybody wants to tackle the question.
Well, let me start first because I have the state that's right on the border, and indeed Las Cruces and El Paso and Juarez are all part of the same metropolitan area there. My guess is that we wish that we understood a little more deeply why that's occurring too, because a lot of public officials who are under threats of death have pretty successfully come across the border into El Paso and into New Mexico and have been relatively safe there, whereas I think that there's been more violence in Arizona. Some of that I think might depend on the cartel family that's involved. I think that there is a pretty big corridor for human smuggling that has always been there between Sinaloa and Arizona, and a lot of the kidnappings, the mass kidnappings that are occurring in Arizona, are related to a group of people that have been smuggled and put in a drop house or a safe house in Arizona, and then the cartels, who I think are having their drug trafficking income squeezed a little bit, are looking for other methodologies to make money, and so that particular group has settled on swooping into the safe house and taking maybe 20 or 40 people at a time and holding them for ransom, of several $1,000s for their families to get them, and so there's a target of opportunity, and there probably aren't as many safe houses and such in El Paso. We think that there are some in New Mexico, which is why we're interested in the issue of trafficking, and I think that sort of kidnapping might trigger a trafficking charge in New Mexico, for instance, once they come in and hold those people against their will, depending on a couple of other factors. So, but overall, the reason I think there's not quite so much violence on this side of the border is that we do have a more mature police force in place. We have the federal police force, ICE and Border Patrol, and those. We have state police, and we even have some National Guard that are helping on the border in New Mexico on our side of the border to police the border. So we do have that joint working group of state, federal, local, military that are all working together for border security on our side of the border, plus the AG's office. I have what we call the Border Violence Group that works on those issues too. So I think it's a mix of things, but I am hopeful that when the judicial system gets more robust in Mexico and on the border, that rule of law will help to bring down the level of violence in Mexico too.
Sí. Yo quisiera complementar la idea, porque la perspectiva forzosamente tiene que ver con una realidad en California, y hablo evidentemente de una experiencia real. En 2007, cuando llegamos nosotros a la administración, en México los procuradores no son electos popularmente, son designados por el gobernador en un periodo de 6 años. Y lo que creo que es importantísimo es identificar los tipos penales en el código penal nuestro. Primero, diferenciar lo que es un secuestro propiamente dicho, que evidentemente tiene que haber un rescate. Por otro lado, hay otro tipo penal que se llama la privación ilegal de la libertad, que es la dinámica en la que los cárteles trabajan. Es decir, el grupo de cártel de la fragmentación que hay en este país, en México ahora hay 7 cárteles, pero se han dividido unos a otros, y es por eso que vemos esta extrema violencia. Y lo que ha sucedido es la privación de personas de un cártel contra otro. Y por otro lado tenemos, como decía muy bien el procurador nuestro, que hablaba del tráfico de indocumentados. Es decir, tenemos 3 acciones distintas, y que mediáticamente eso, cada vez que sucede, se habla como un secuestro potencialmente. En 2007 teníamos nosotros una cifra histórica en Baja California de 120 secuestros como tal documentados. Hoy nadie cree que tenemos nada más un solo secuestro. Y cuando sucede esto, ¿qué fue lo que pasó? Bueno, fue una guerra, porque lo que está pasando, que los narcotraficantes, al ver que en los Estados Unidos estaban frenando el paso de la droga, a esto le llamamos la involución del delito, empiezan a explorar en otras actividades comerciales, como son el secuestro, el robo de vehículos, inclusive hasta el robo de cajeros. Es decir, todo esto es crimen organizado. Y aquí lo más importante de todo este tema es que en California hoy básicamente tenemos eventos de este tipo, hemos platicado, y esto tiene que ser dicho de una manera muy prudente por las autoridades federales, como la información que hay, cómo trabajar juntos, porque lo que está pasando en la frontera es que en ocasiones se secuestra en Estados Unidos y se hace la negociación en México, o viceversa. En México puede secuestrar eventualmente a una persona americana y pasa a Estados Unidos. Entonces, la frontera pareciera que es un signo de impunidad, y es lo que estamos tratando de combatir, de que no sea la frontera un elemento de impunidad y que aprovechen esto los narcotraficantes.
The gentleman in glasses in the back had his hand up, and then I'll move to the front. Please state your name and affiliation.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Alberto Conchadino. I am from Colombia. I'm recently retired from the Pan American Health Organization here in Washington, where I used to work in violence prevention issues. The presentations are wonderful. I like all of them. And it's difficult to go to one or two questions because there's too many issues to discuss. So I decided to make a couple of comments and one question. My comment is that the two Attorney General from the two states of the United States made great points on the issue of how legal issues will be raised and work to fight against drug trafficking and these people. But I didn't hear anything from you two about the issues of prevention, how your offices are developing ideas on how to prevent this to happen, because that's the most important thing that justice can do, to prevent things to happen. And the last question is, maybe many people have raised that question, but I remember now that President Cedillo, former President Cedillo from Mexico, former President Gaviria from Colombia, and former President Cardoso from Brazil made the point about 12 months ago, something like that, on the issue of legalization of drug consumption, not drug trafficking, of course, drug consumption. I would like to hear comments on that particular issue. What do you think is the current debate on that? Thank you very much.
And let me just clarify, when you say prevention, you meant in prevention programs to prevent drug abuse or treatment, right? Is that
yes, sir.
Drug courts, that
yeah.
kind of thing? Okay.
Basically, primary prevention is that, not to happen anything.
Right, to diminish consumption. Okay. Who would like to?
Let me start on that. The bottom line is there's a couple of things that America is clearly responsible for. One, the insatiable appetite for drugs that is driving this thing. And I think I think I speak for every one of my colleagues in that we understand that, and we understand that drug abuse in America is a huge, huge part of this whole thing, and we have obligations not just to be law enforcement officials prosecuting people who traffic in drugs, but also trying to reduce levels of drug abuse in the United States, and I think we all do that. I know I'm chairman of a methamphetamine task force in Colorado that has significantly reduced methamphetamine consumption in Colorado over the last couple of years, and it's just a constant struggle for us. On one hand, I think we're making some progress, and then all of a sudden my state is exploding with medical marijuana dispensaries, and I think the legislature's under the naive notion that all these people are growing it themselves, when in fact the same trafficking lanes that supply the illicit drugs are now supplying, are now feeding these dispensaries on every corner and all this sort of thing. And we all know, all the research shows that teenage use of marijuana is a function of acceptability and accessibility, and we're going to see higher rates of youth use and expansion into other drugs. Frankly, I don't think we get it but I can tell you these folks here get it, and we're out trying to get that message every day. What I wish more Americans were alert to, and what I think we need to do, there's a couple of issues what we need to do a better job of. We need to make Americans understand that we're causing thousands of Mexican police officers to die every year, and people like this gentleman to courageously fight this fight which is more on our behalf than anybody else. And it's our insatiable appetite for drugs that's driving a big part of this. The other thing that I wish we had a lot more American awareness of is the extent to which our arms trafficking back the other way is fueling a lot of the violence. The fact of the matter is that the cartels are extremely well armed as a result of weapons coming from the United States to Mexico. Now, interestingly enough, in the discussions we've had through the years, I mean, it's been remarkable to me, the federal attorney generals of Mexico have stood up and said, we understand that you have constitutional principles in the United States about the right to bear arms. We accept that, even though we have very, very strict laws in Mexico about weapons, but at least we can expect that you'll enforce your own laws, because seriously, half of the I don't know what the 90% would be illegal in the United States. Am I correct on that? Yeah. Of all these AK-47s and everything going past, that's all illegal drug trafficking or arms trafficking, even in the United States. So we've got a lot to be accountable for, and we need to, I think, make sure Americans understand the extent to which we're driving a lot of the border war.
Can I just add to that? And we have a program in New Mexico too, and I think a lot of the AGs do. And matter of fact, at our national meeting this week, we had a 2 or 3 hour discussion on the abuse of prescription drugs and other drugs that are coming in. But one, I want to say that we've had a very successful relationship with Mexico in fighting the manufacture of methamphetamines. I think that our counterparts in Mexico have worked to make pseudoephedrine more difficult to obtain in Mexico as well as in the U.S., and so that cuts down on the manufacturing. So working together, we're able to do that. But we have a program where we go into the schools at the middle school level and talk to young people about the dangers, to themselves of doing drugs, primarily methamphetamine right now because it's a drug of choice. But heroin is an issue in New Mexico particularly. We have a county that has the highest overdose death rate from heroin in the country. And a lot of that heroin comes across the border from Mexico, but it's the use, it's the generational use there actually that's driving that consumption. So we talk to young people about what it does to their health and to their families and such, but I'm starting to talk about what the drug use in the U.S. does to fuel the violence that's going on in Mexico, because I think a lot of young people are socially aware as well. And I think they do need to understand that if they think that nobody gets hurt if they smoke a little marijuana, that they don't realize that the money that they spend to buy the marijuana fuels in great extent, maybe 50%, the operations of the cartels in Mexico and elsewhere.
Yeah, talking about the other question is important because in Mexico people talk about legalization. But in my idea, it has to be in 2 points, talking about health and talking about police or crime. So it has to be a murder if one country decides to legalization the drugs. So it has to be in an international order. When we talk about Holland or other countries that they make the step, you understand that maybe they're trying to do something, but has to be a real cooperation, international cooperation, because in other form will be really a murder.
The lady in the blue had a hand up a while ago. If we could get a microphone to her.
Thank you. My name is Sally Denton, and I am an author and journalist and a public policy scholar here. And one comment, I think there's an insatiable appetite for weapons all over the world, and that Mexico is often a crossroads there. I'm from Santa Fe, New Mexico, so I'm and I've done a lot on the prostitute, written a lot about the prostitutes and the murdered prostitutes in Albuquerque, and actually started my journalism career at the Rio Grande Sun in Rio Arriba County 30 years ago.
Which is the county I was talking about that has the big heroin
Right.
problem. Yeah.
And I mean, I left there to come to Washington to be a journalist and returned 30 years later, and the same situation exists there. My question is your reference to the kidnappings in New Mexico, and I'm not familiar with the term mass kidnappings, like in Arizona. Is that something like that happened in New Mexico, and is that like a group of gang members or individuals?
I don't think that we've seen mass kidnappings in New Mexico yet, or not that they haven't occurred, but we're not aware of it. One of the problems with human trafficking, some of these mass kidnappings and such, is that the victims don't self-report. We're actually using some money that we got from the Justice Department to train our law enforcement officials in southern New Mexico and all over New Mexico to recognize the victims of trafficking. Because they're afraid or because the people that brought them here have told them you don't have a passport, you don't have anything, and so if you get caught, they're going to deport you back to wherever you are. They don't have good information that they don't report. So whether we've had mass kidnappings in New Mexico or not, I don't know, but none that are reported. But in Arizona, the Arizona Attorney General has shown us photos of people that they've saved from these, that have been bound and gagged, and their photographs have been taken and sent to their families. And I think by and large that they believe that those are being carried out by cartel associates anyway that are in the United States and are utilizing that as a methodology for making money in places where they're losing money from our efforts to curtail the flow of drugs into the country. And so, but once again, because those people are already in the country illegally, it might be happening more there too, but they don't report it, because if the family pays the ransom and they go to Illinois or Tennessee or wherever their final destination is, they probably don't report it.
Thank you.
It's the lady with a flowered shirt. And
Thank you.
please.
Hi, my name is Damini Mohan, and I'm an intern with the Washington Center. I'm from Canada, and it's slightly digressing from the topic and going to Canada, Mexico, drug-related crime. I know that the crime in Canada related to drugs, drug trafficking, gun trafficking is increasing. So, first, I would like if you could, Mr. Attorney General Moreno, please slightly elaborate on that. And then also, I'm curious too if there are any initiatives that are being undertaken between the Canadian provinces and the Mexican states, or the federal government in both the countries. Thank you.
Voy a contestar en español. Bien. Gracias a los esfuerzos de la Conferencia de Procuradores, tuvimos la oportunidad de conocer a Oprah. Eric Oprah es el procurador de British Columbia, con quien hicimos también un enlace. Y la expectativa en Vancouver y Victoria era qué estaba haciendo un procurador local en esta entidad. Y básicamente era porque entendimos que en Vancouver, al menos en esta zona, había la presencia ya de cártel mexicanos. Y esto ha generado, evidentemente, compartir información y también estar muy de cerca. Porque lo que está sucediendo acá es que existe una relación internacional. Siempre ha habido una relación internacional México-Estados Unidos, México-Canadá desde la perspectiva federal, y hay un apoyo federal, pero el tema que hoy estamos aquí discutiendo son las relaciones entre los estados, es decir, entre el caso Baja California, California, Colorado, y por otro lado British Columbia o otra, digamos, región de Canadá. Estamos explorando, porque el apoyo está, pero es tanta la dinámica y la necesidad de hacer esfuerzos rápidos e inmediatos que básicamente el esfuerzo se está dando en este nivel. Ahora lo que ha estado sucediendo es que nosotros mismos estamos trabajando con esta visión de hacer lo que no hacíamos antes. Todo venía desde la federación. Ahora estamos trabajando estado con estado, y en el caso de Canadá ha sido lo mismo. Lo que me parece importante es hacer ya de alguna forma una postura también del propio gobierno canadiense del reconocimiento de la presencia de las gangas y las pandillas, que es la traducción en los Estados americanos, en este caso, cómo es que se está infiltrando de alguna manera la venta de metanfetaminas, sobre todo en las discotecas, en los jóvenes, y cómo controlar esta dinámica. Hay más de 1 millón de pandillerismo en los Estados Unidos y en Canadá también va creciendo muchísimo. Entonces lo que estamos haciendo es alertar con estrategias conjuntas, concretamente con el gobierno, en este caso ahora, con British Columbia. En este momento, policías mexicanos están siendo entrenados, pero son policías federales. Estamos tratando de que también policías locales y municipales tengan esta información.
Thank you. The lady in the purple coat. We're having a little trouble with the translation, but if you're having trouble when you need translation, raise your hand and we'll try to get your units fixed.
Thank you. My name is Margaret Daly Hayes, and I teach about security issues in Latin America at Georgetown and Mexico at the National Defense University. I have 2 questions. Attorney General Moreno, when you were answering the question about prevention, you didn't mention the need to contribute to build education and job creation. And I wonder whether you all could address the impact of the border economies on the issue at hand, on the pandillerismo. My second question would be on the time frame that you envisage for the accusatorial system kind of take root in Mexico. Certainly, Eric's recent report on a trip to the border cities, frustration was expressed in the application of the accusatorial system, because when the evidence wasn't sufficient, the citizens were frustrated with the results. In Colombia, we, the United States, have contributed a lot in terms of training, but we haven't really approached the universities to begin education at the university level. And I wonder whether you would address that time frame and whether we need to focus perhaps more on engaging law schools and others in education in this area. Thank you.
Voy a responder ahora en español. El tema básico de la guerra es tener la visión básicamente en atacar los carteles. No podemos hacer planes integrales, ni podemos hablar ahora de una perspectiva educativa, porque de alguna manera en México se dio así. Sin embargo, la llegada de estos carteles fue, o es lo que está sucediendo en el caso ahora de Chihuahua, que es donde está verdaderamente, digamos, la visión o la experiencia más dramática. En cambio, hoy en Baja California ha disminuido potencialmente, es decir, estamos en otra etapa. Para pasar a la siguiente etapa, evidentemente es importante el fortalecimiento de la visión preventiva. Cuando hablamos, por ejemplo, de una crisis económica, cómo darle empleo a los jóvenes y que estos jóvenes tengan expectativas, de tal suerte que tienen que haber planes integrales. No puede ser solamente la parte policíaca, la parte militar, sino que tiene que ser evidentemente la visión de tener muy en cuenta todo lo que tiene que ver con oportunidades de trabajo, con oportunidades de crecimiento, de expectativas de vida de los ciudadanos. Y creo que aquí es donde estamos trabajando. Va junto, pero no podríamos hacerlo de otra manera, porque ¿qué hacer en un país bajo estas circunstancias en las que podemos hablar de planes integrales, pero si no tenemos, y al otro día tenemos el muerto encima, el secuestro encima, es como que no queda clara esta parte? Por eso hoy debe de haber un fortalecimiento preventivo. Estamos apostando a la prevención, pero tiene que ver con una visión a mediano y a largo plazo. Este es un tema generacional, nos va a costar años. Cuando uno habla de prevención queda como una idea muy interesante, pero ¿cómo aterrizo estos temas básicamente el día con el día? Por eso hoy a corto, a mediano y largo plazo tenemos que tener una visión hacia dónde debe ir la prevención. Creo que si hubiéramos prevenido no hubiera pasado lo que está pasando hoy, pero la prevención básicamente va a enfocarse a la visión de los jóvenes, a las nuevas generaciones. Y la otra parte creo que es fundamental. Estamos ahora no solamente cuando estamos hablando de la implementación del nuevo sistema, que sean solo los operadores del sistema. Estoy hablando del fiscal o de la defensa o del juez. Estamos hablando de cambiar las materias en la universidad. La gente no está acostumbrada en México, por ejemplo, al concepto de justicia alternativa. La mediación y la conciliación no es un tema que estamos hasta ahora incorporando, y es como se empiezan a despresurizar los sistemas de justicia cuando hay la visión cultural de que en México todo el mundo queremos que vaya a la cárcel. No importa que haya sido una amenaza, una lesión o un delito menor, pero hay esta cultura de que todo el mundo tiene que ir a la cárcel. Ahora estamos trabajando en el proceso de justicia alternativa, estamos yendo a las universidades a cambiar las asignaturas y estamos trabajando con los abogados, y al final creo que lo más importante es la ciudadanización, que la gente empiece a conocer el sistema. La gente no conoce actualmente el sistema actual, mucho menos el que viene. Entonces tenemos que fortalecer, que la gente encuentre una sinergia, y el Estado mexicano tiene que enfrentarse a ser muy crítico, porque la ciudadanización del tema de justicia está básicamente en esta experiencia de que está desconectado el concepto, y tenemos que trabajar mucho en este esquema.
I think General Suthers has a brief comment on the transition to adversarial system.
The last point. We in the United States are used to dealing with the inefficiencies of an adversary system. We know that one of the prices we pay for the rule of law and the emphasis on defendant rights is that sometimes we have some bad fact-finding by juries. Sometimes we have some verdicts that everybody rolls their eyes about. But in the final analysis, we accept that because we embrace the constitutional rights that the system embodies. Part of our training of other professionals is we have to be blunt about that. Now, Mexico, I think smartly, is deciding that the cases are going to be heard by 3-judge panels.
No. Yes.
That's right. Okay, so they will not have juries. And for those of us who have been in the business a long time, we can tell them that they probably won't suffer some of the inefficiencies that we're used to in fact-finding by some juries. But when things are done, there's lots of things. Any good trial lawyer will tell you you cannot predict what's going to happen in a courtroom when you put witnesses on the stand and you cross-examine them and all that kind of stuff. And it's part of the training. We have to introduce them to those aspects of oral advocacy that you don't see when you've got a paper system. So I think it's a big part of the training. I think it's an important point.
Great. We have anybody else? We have time for a couple more quick questions. Not sure who had their. Yes. It's the gentleman in the suit.
Hi, Robert Donnelly, Mexico Institute. I had a question about early release and deportation of Mexican nationals to Mexican border cities, and if you've experienced that trend as the states, especially in the western part of the country, facing a fiscal crisis. Is that a worrisome trend? Is that something that you've been discussing with your Mexican partners? Has it influenced your collaboration and relationship?
I'll take a first shot at that. It's long been a problem, and every single one of these individuals that are here from CWAG could tell you situations about people who have been deported, criminal aliens, been deported, have come back in the United States in violation of the law and committed fairly serious crimes. In fact, I think General Shurtleff was relating that to the Attorney General yesterday and someone from BICE. That's been a problem for a long time. I've been a local prosecutor, I've run a prison system, I know all the competing interests. On one hand, just giving my state, for example, Colorado, not a large state, we've got 5 million people, we spend $64 million a year to incarcerate in prison Mexican nationals. So these are people in our prison. So these are people who have committed serious enough crimes that the system says this is too serious to simply deport them. They've committed murder, they've committed rape, whatever. As a matter of justice, we need to detain these people in our institutions. The federal government reimbursed us $3 million last year for the $64 million we expended to incarcerate. We got a huge budget crisis. The original plan in Colorado was to do early release of 3,000 inmates this year, 3,000 inmates next year. Just as a little anecdote, what they decided to do, instead of going through the entire system and figuring out who the lowest risk folks were, they decided to do 6 months before a mandatory release date, they would let them out early. I kind of suggested that may be problematic because having been in and around the system a long time, if you're in prison in Colorado 6 months before the state has to release you as a matter of law, there's only two possibilities why that's the case, and neither of them are good. Number one, you've been passed over for discretionary parole so many times because you're high risk, or you haven't applied for discretionary parole because you know you probably won't get it. And that's who we've been letting out 6 months early, and to the extent that we've been deporting some of them, there's already indications that many of them are back in the country. So lots of competing interests, and all it takes is one or two cases, and that will be the headline, and that will drive a lot of the public policy.
Anybody else? Gary, General King, did you?
All I wanted to add was really a statistic that probably everybody should be aware of. My U.S. attorney told me that they actually have added a significant number of new prosecutors. I think 20 was the number they used over. I don't remember if it was the last 2 years or whatever, but most of them have been assigned to prosecute immigration cases. So the number of cases where people are being processed through the system and deported is probably increasing as well, so it probably does indeed add to that. But we haven't had a lot of discussions, at least in New Mexico, with our counterpart about whether those particular folks are causing crime on the border where they get deported to. So I don't know.
We're going to wrap up. I wanted to. I'm going to take. I'll take one quick question, hoping it's quick, and then we're going to wrap up. The lady in the gray suit.
Hi, my name is Kristen Finkley, Congressional Research Service. There's been a lot of discussion about whether there has or has not been significant spillover violence. And some cities and police departments have reported certain crimes that they are attributing to spillover violence, and some are reporting different crimes. And I'm wondering if anyone has measured those violent crimes in their districts that are specifically related to drug trafficking, and if they track that statistically. Thank you.
General King, you've been involved in the trafficking issue. Have you?
Well, well, with regard to all those crimes, I suspect that my counterpart in the U.S. Attorney's Office would have more statistics than I do on it. We in New Mexico have little enough resources to actually prosecute the crimes. We don't spend a lot of resources in that I'm aware of in developing those statistics. And I shouldn't say that we don't spend the resources in doing that. We have 13 district attorneys and myself, and we don't have a good way to accumulate the data from that either. And so unfortunately, I can't give you good statistics on that. In talking to my fellow AGs, I think we feel like a significant portion of the populations that are in our prisons, maybe as many as 80% of the people that are in our prisons, are there because of some crime that has a relation to drug abuse too. I don't know if I'm seeing nodding of heads or not.
Well,
but,
80% of the people in prison have a substance abuse problem. Yeah. In my state, 22% are there for a drug-related crime, primarily trafficking. But let me just tell you how drugs influence crime in ways that you may not think about. Besides the violence, my state ranks, I think, 6th in identity theft. And so we bore down on what's driving the identity theft problem over all these years. 2/3 of the identity theft is committed by methamphetamine addicts. Clearly 2/3, not highly sophisticated. This isn't, serious internet stuff. This is stealing mail out of your mailbox, stealing out of your trash cans and things like that. Rand did a study that estimated that the cost, I think, for 2007 of methamphetamine abuse in the United States was $24-some billion. My state alone was $1.4 billion was the cost of methamphetamine abuse. And criminal justice was just a part of that.
Yeah, I heard a district attorney testify for the legislature in Tennessee the other day with a district attorney's conference, and he used that same 80% figure that whether directly or indirectly connected with drug use or drug abuse, about 80% of the people that they prosecuted in a rural area of West Tennessee was somehow connected to drugs. And that is a good place for me to sort of conclude with a concluding question, kind of a double question. One is, I wanted to ask about drug courts because we did have a question about prevention. It's something that hasn't been addressed. It is one thing I know in Tennessee we've had some success with. We've actually had Mexican officials come to Nashville, which has a pretty good drug court. We've got a few. We don't have enough. Most states don't. It's not as widespread as they should be, but they seem to be having reasonable success in many jurisdictions. So I wanted to ask what's going on in Mexico in that regard, and if the programs that, although attorneys general at the state level are not necessarily that involved in things like drug courts, is that part of the initiative that we're involved in with the states in Mexico? And then finally, if each of you could make just a brief comment on, we've heard a lot about what we're doing well, the cooperation that's working. If you could think of one thing that we're not doing that we ought to be doing in terms of cooperation, either because we don't have the funding or we can't figure out how to do it, I think that would be a good way to conclude, not on a negative note, but a positive note, looking forward to what we need to work on. So,
yo quisiera plantear el tema. Básicamente hoy lo que se está haciendo en México, aunado a todos estos temas, es explorar en esta visión que vamos a hacer con las drogas. Hoy el tema principal es el narcomenudeo. El narcomenudeo es el tema que de alguna manera está destruyendo las calles, las, políticas públicas. Y el tema es que básicamente lo que tendremos que hacer es encontrar una colaboración. En este momento en el estado de Nuevo León es donde se está explorando el corte de drogas. El procurador Medina Mora inició con este proyecto y me parece que es un tema muy interesante que apenas está explotándose desde la dinámica de quienes están cometiendo crímenes, pero que son por primera vez, le llamamos nosotros, primodelincuentes, que es decir, por la primera ocasión, y estamos recibiendo mucha información en términos de qué hacer y cómo colaborar con el gobierno norteamericano. Es decir, aquí la idea es trabajar, como lo decía hace un momento, con todos los programas que ya han tenido éxito en los Estados Unidos. I don't know if you understand what I'm talking about it. No?
We were having a little translation problem, but I don't know if it's working. I don't know what's wrong with these devices. It's the machine that's not. I see. Well, okay. Speaking of one thing that we're not doing right.
Yeah. That's exactly
certainly that's
de alguna forma, pues entonces, ahora el tema que estamos enfrentando es el narcomenudeo. Es un tema que ataca a las zonas urbanas. Es decir, es un tema muy focalizado que tenemos que trabajar. Como lo mismo que está sucediendo en las pandillas, en las gangas en los Estados Unidos, nosotros este tema lo tenemos como un tema urbano. El narcotráfico es un tema que tiene que ver más con el tema de rutas de tránsito y de áreas de oportunidad de la distribución y evidentemente dónde se produce y hacia dónde va. Por eso tenemos que distinguir estos dos temas. Por un lado el narcotráfico, repito, que parece que se confunde el tema, y el otro el narcomenudeo, que son temas distintos, pero que estamos enfocando ahorita programas americanos que han servido y que creo que hacia allá es la tendencia. Primero, ponernos de acuerdo en México qué vamos a hacer con estos temas, porque ahora es una guerra, en el buen sentido, entre federales y locales, porque los federales están diciendo, nosotros, y bueno, yo estuve trabajando 8 años en la federación, pero mis amigos dicen, esta es una responsabilidad que ahora le toca a los estados, y nosotros decimos, sí, pero ¿cuánto presupuesto? Porque si me estás mandando nomás el problema, no voy a hacer absolutamente nada, y es un tema de recursos económicos. Creo que esto es lo básico en este tema.
General King, in terms of either the drug court question or you can take your choice, what are we not doing that we ought to be doing?
Well, I think I can answer both of those in the same sentence almost. We're we're doing drug courts in New Mexico, and we think that in a lot of cases that they're very successful. In the case of, say, first-time users or something, I don't think that we can put everybody who's a drug user in prison. I think we have to have methodologies for dealing with that. We need to have better treatment. We need to have drug court programs where we can have some alternative methodologies to incarceration for penalties. But one of the problems that we have is that with the sort of international budget crunch, but certainly with the budget crunch in New Mexico, one of the first places that gets a cut is treatment and novel programs like the drug courts. And so, if we're serious about fighting this war, we have to have the resources to do it, and that it's going to require our federal government, it's going to require the Mexican federal government, requires our state government, and require the Mexican state governments to bring the resources to bear to deal with the problem, and not to say, well, we have all these other problems and we can't deal with this one right now, because these are problems that will grow and grow if we don't deal with them at the basic level. And we have to be smart about how we do that. But the good news is, and the good thing that we can do, I think, is there are, and we've had some discussions today, there are federal dollars available. I think that we need to think about how we can spend them in a smarter way, and I think we need input from our counterparts, the Mexican attorneys general, as to what kind of resources we can get to them that they can use on the ground. And this program that CWAG has with the Mexican attorneys general, that's funded by USAID, the Rule of Law Project, doesn't take a lot of dollars compared to some of the other programs, but because of the human investment, all of my investigators and all of my lawyers that'll do the training for all of your investigators and all of your lawyers, it gets amplified. That small amount of money gets amplified, and so I think that we just have to be smarter about how we share our dollars and how we cooperate with each other, so that every dollar gets used to do some positive things.
General Suthers, you got the first word. You're going to get the last word.
I have become a big fan of drug courts. I was kind of a hardcore prosecutor, skeptical at first, but they do two things that I think are absolutely the right road. For those of you who think that legalization is the answer, I would remind you that 90% of people in drug treatment in the United States are there at court referral. And there's a huge issue how people would get into any kind of treatment if they were not subjected to a court system. So the drug courts allow us to put people into treatment and emphasize that our first priority for the user, for the addict, is treatment and not incarceration or anything like that. And I think as drug courts have expanded, they've become fairly effective in areas, and I think it's a good way to go. I reiterate what I said earlier in terms of what's not happening that should be happening. Americans need to wake up and understand that their actions are causing thousands and thousands of our brethren to the South to die every year. And we need a much greater linkage, because a lot of these people, I think, would understand, and maybe we may be able to change some behaviors in this country if they understood the linkage between what's taking place on our southern border and their addictions.
Well, thank you very much, and I'd like to give a hand to our panel.